Today on the World Geekly News Podcast, we go to another world, another time, to the Age of Wonder, to talk to J.M. Lee about his work on the Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance.
It's World Geekly News!
We've made no secret of our love of Dark Crystal here at World Geekly News. The movie was an important part of most of our childhoods, and the new Netflix series has been phenomenal. Not only is it just a good show, but as I've said elsewhere on the site, it is just a mind-boggling work of art. The set design, the music, puppets, the puppeteers, the writing, the directing, the voice work, all of it. It's a group of artists at the top of their game collaborating in this really amazing way. Today with us, we're lucky enough to have one of the authors who's helped shape the world of the Dark Crystal in both his novels and as a writer on the show, author J.M. Lee. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. I'm really excited about this.
Absolutely.
So your bio on like Twitter and Facebook and everywhere has like the same story that I absolutely love and I wanted to ask about. So he's born and raised in Minnesota. You spent your formative years searching for talking animals and believing you could control the weather.
Yes, that is true.
Can you explain a bit more about that?
I was like kind of a, I guess people would say, creative as a child. One of my mother's favorite stories is I don't remember where we were, but someone asked me when I was very young, like how my parents met. And I proceeded to describe the scene from Disney's Sleeping Beauty where Aurora and the prince meet in the forest and the animals are all there. So I guess that sort of like maybe puts it into context. I actually I've always had this. I loved like Watership Down and Tad Williams's like Tail Chasers song and things as a kid too. So I read a lot of Redwall books about talking.
Yeah.
I was convinced that was real. So yeah.
So what age did you finally find out you could not control the weather?
Well, I'm not still completely sure that that's not true.
So I noticed you. If this is accurate, you were kind of discovered in a kind of an unusual way that there was a contest, the Author Quest. Is that correct?
Yes. In 2013, the Henson Company sent out sort of a call for submissions to find an author to write a Dark Crystal prequel novel using a lot of the material that had been developed for previous sort of prequel treatments that never got quite off the ground. And that's sort of where I came in. My agent emailed me and she was like, this is something, do you know what the Dark Crystal is? Like, would you be interested in doing that? And I was like, yeah, I know what that is. I would definitely, like, of course. So yeah, that's how it happened. I guess there were around 500 entries and there was a finalist round where we worked with Penguin to sort of, I think it was sort of a test run to see, is this an author who can do revisions and work with an editing team and that kind of thing too. So it was very exciting and also very, it's not exactly like the way that you plan to get into publishing, but it was a wild ride, and and here we are, four books later.
Yeah, so had you written much before that?
Yeah, I mean, I had a literary agent, and we were on sub for a separate fantasy project, which got shelved later. But I think I had never really considered working on IP as sort of like an option for getting into publishing or like sort of fortifying my publishing career. But I really love it, actually. I mean, fan fiction is a really fun way to take part in existing properties that like invigorated me as a child. So I really liked the chance to work on a team, meet everybody at Henson, and the Frauds and things, and sort of get into the world. It's a very different experience, but I really, really enjoy it.
Awesome. So the Netflix show was announced in like 2017. You had already published the first novel like a year before that was even announced. which means you were writing the first book at least 3, if not 4 years before the show even premiered.
Yes.
So you've been working on this a while. My first question really is, did you know that there was like a series planned when you started writing, or was it just, oh hey, we're expanding the franchise with books and comics? You did well with the short story. Why don't you come on board?
I think, I mean, I had an inkling. There was some verbiage in the like well, first of all, we originally only signed for 1 book, but before Shadows of the Dark Crystal was even published, they came to me and asked, do you want to do 3 more? Do you want to make this into a series? So, and there was some verbiage, I think, in like the second contract that I was like, that looks like it might be making room for some kind of treatment, you know? And I mean, like, I've always known that Henson has been very interested in trying to get, you know, a prequel series greenlit. I didn't know it was going to be Netflix. I don't know that anybody knew it was going to be Netflix until, you know, things started heating up. But yeah, I got the call that the show had been greenlit at Netflix while we were in the process of putting the final touches on book 2, Song of the Dark Crystal. So that's sort of like the timeline as far as that all, which would have been in late 2016. Yeah.
Okay, so book 2 is when, but book 1 like really ties in. You know, it's starting off with Gurjin already like being charged with treason. So how did that come about? Like, yeah.
Well, so when the Author Quest was first announced, there was already a huge wealth of Dark Crystal sort of lore and information on darkcrystal.com that was all sort of packaged as part of the Author Quest. So, and that was all coming from, it was sort of a combination, consolidation of all of the best of the best ideas from the various treatments that had been in development over the many years that this prequel world had been developed prior to the Author Quest. And so characters like Rianne and Gurjin and Skek Mal were all a part of that darkcrystal.com sort of Bible. So the story of Rianne making the discovery and that he had a friend named Gurjin were sort of already part of that, I want to say like conceptual world that was put forth in Author Quest. So it was really fascinating to see like, so I took it from a direction where I said, well, I don't want to focus on Rianne. I'd rather focus on like sort of a side character who comes into this world through whatever means. So that ended up being Naya, who is Gurjin's twin sister. And then the show follows Rianne much more closely, which actually ended up benefiting both series because we were able to sort of split the 2 storylines apart in a way that didn't, I want to say, like, cause too many problems, I think, between the 2.
Right. So, okay, that's interesting. Were you given any boundaries? Like when you started writing, were they like, well, you can't really talk about this stuff, or was just anything on the table at that point?
In the beginning, before the show was announced, actually, I was given the encouragement to kind of go wherever I wanted to go, like really, you know, crack this world open, go cool places that we can't go in a puppet film, you know, because in a book, it doesn't cost me anything additional to send them, you know, onto the water or set them on fire, or, you know, they can blink and it's not expensive. But yeah, and then after the show started in development, actually, I was called to be on the show. And I think in a lot of ways it was to make sure that we sort of had an open channel of communication between the 2 storylines so that we knew, you know, okay, in the show they're going to go this way, and in the books they're going to go this way, so that we had sort of a let's say like an open table way of looking at the 2 narratives.
Right on. So you mentioned there was already a Bible kind of written, which is interesting because the movie itself, the original Dark Crystal movie is really bare bones. There's not a lot of like, there's a sense of mythology there, but it's kind of just the hero's quest story, and it just moves along. But your books and the show has a really dense mythology. How much of it was already established, and what did you get to really sink your teeth into and add on?
So that's a great question. And one of the things that I think I always loved about The Dark Crystal is that if you watch the film, at first blush, it does seem like the lore is not extremely pronounced. But once you kind of watch it for like the 100th, the 200th time, you start to see like the consistency of Brian Froud's world building within the world. There's a great book called World of the Dark Crystal, it's an art book by Brian Froud, and it's a really beautiful book that includes a lot. It's one of, I would say, the best and richest sources of Dark Crystal mythology. An absolute must-read for anybody who's trying to get into the lore. It's got a lot of creature illustration. There's parts that are from Agra's perspective about, sort of like the beginnings of the Gelflings. So a lot of the lore sort of stemmed from that place. There was also a graphic novel series called Creation Myths that came out before the young adult novels, which builds some of the Gelfling folklore and adventure stories, and so those are another place. When I was working on the YA novels, my main task was to build out the Gelfling clans. And that was a thing that, in the original darkcrystal.com website, there were maybe like a paragraph about each of the 7 clans. And in these 4 books, we were going to go and we knew that in the very beginning that was one of sort of the main narrative mandates that we were trying to pursue, was to visit those clans, really show what Gelfling culture was like back before the Darkening and the Skeksis started rounding everybody up. So sort of putting like their villages on the map and sort of building out what their culture looks like and how the clans interact. Most of that was a project that sort of was developed through the YA novels, and then strongly leveraged when we were building out Age of Resistance. And then Age of Resistance really built out, I think, sort of how the Skeksis back in this time were. The books don't really focus on the Skeksis too much, but the show does a really great job of characterizing each of the Skeksis individually, which I really love.
I just finished your first book not that long ago, and now I'm actually a little disappointed that the series didn't include some events, because they're fantastic. You've done a wonderful job, and so is the show, of really capturing the feel of the Dark Crystal and how everything fits. And this is a project that it started 30 some years ago, and what's been most impressive about, to me, your work and the work in the show is how well everything fits, how it feels like it belongs to the old movie. What were some of those challenges of making your ideas, your own creativity, which obviously we've established has been strong since an early age? How is that fitting into someone else's original idea, someone else's concepts?
It wasn't as challenging as I thought it was going to be. And, one thing that I really love about working with Henson is that everybody is very open-minded and willing to listen and very creative. And the team that I worked with, both on the YA novels and that we worked with on the show, were always really fascinated to hear, like, what are your ideas? Like, what do you think? Where can we take this? So sometimes the biggest challenge was knowing like when to stop when to stop thinking about creative stuff and pick something and then kind of go with it. Because also when you're building a canon mythology, that once you put it down, that's kind of, in a way, that's the milestone. That's where we're kind of setting that, that aspect is not in stone necessarily, but definitely, you're setting up these tentpoles. But for me, I really enjoyed, I would say, building out the language the most. That was really fun for me. I have the background in linguistics, so creating words like the word Madra was, and sort of seeing how that tied into Gelfling culture was one of the greatest joys for me. And my favorite part of Age of Resistance hitting Netflix is seeing people like use those words and learning Podling and saying and using the word Madra without having to. It's like the Khaleesi, you know what I mean? Like the Dark Crystal. I love that. I love it so much.
Okay, so I did want to talk about this. You do have a degree in linguistics with like a focus on like Japanese, I think, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to get just a little bit nerdy with these next questions. So I apologize to anyone who doesn't want a recap of freshman English classes today, but this is like one of those holy grails of nerddom. Tolkien had Elvish,
Yep.
Star Trek has Klingon, Dark Crystal has Podling. You created a language for this show. Did they ask you to do this, or were you just like, hey guys, I've got a degree in linguistics, I can make a language?
I mean, it was sort of a little bit of both, actually. I didn't even occur to me that we would go forward with it, but actually, while they were working on like the scripts later, Javi emailed me and said, Javier Grujo Marxwatch, who was on the show, he remembered that I had the degree in linguistics, and he emailed me and he was like, would you be interested in doing this? And I was like, of course I would. That's like a dream job for, anybody who is both a science fiction fantasy fan and a linguist. You wish for those moments where you can do that. So yeah, I thought that was just, it was such a nice, like, different project. You write a novel, you're in the depths of the manuscript or a screenplay, but the language was really fun because it was sort of this satellite project that in some ways it didn't have to happen, but everything is so much better because it did. All the pieces came together. We did like a Skype call with the puppeteers when we were first sort of like working through the language, and I did like a little lesson with them, and it was just, everybody was so excited about it, and it just is one of those like little sparks of joy that is sprinkled throughout the series that I think makes it that much more unique.
So we were talking a minute ago about, like, once you put something down, it's there in the mythology, and the Podlings did talk in the Dark Crystal movie. So did you try to incorporate any of those sounds or phrases in there, or would you just kind of brush that aside and retcon the language?
I definitely did use, so the original language spoken by the Podlings, I believe, this is what I've heard, I believe that it is a sort of like a pidgin version of Bosnian Serbo-Croatian. I actually ran some of the lines by a Bosnian native speaker, a friend of mine, and she was like, yep, some of these are definitely just Bosnian words. And so I think one of the motivations for creating a completely constructed language for Age of Resistance is to, like, get away from using an actual Earth language,
Right.
Because there's some problems with that. But but I still wanted the new Podling language to reflect and sort of capture the essence in a way of the original Podling language, so it didn't sound completely different. So, for example, I used a sound set that's sort of a simplified version of some of the words that you can hear in the original film. And then I guess in a way it's kind of retconning, but just sort of trying to capture the cadence or the syllabic emphasis, and the sound set was a good way to make a good nod to the original film, and also at the same time sort of bring it to the next level of being its own unique thing.
How deep does this rabbit hole go? Like, did you just develop a vocabulary, or is there like a whole deal, like syntax, morphology, like?
There is some morphology. I did, so there's like a full verb conjugation table. There are some declensions for case. The vocabulary is, I think it's like 500 or 600 words now. And there's a lot of cultural notes too. One thing I mentioned on a previous I think interview was that there's the Podlings, for example, they don't count higher than 9. They count up to 9, and then everything past 9 is just more than 9. So it's stuff like that, just to kind of give it that that flavor that makes it a little bit different, but also is unique to Podlings.
So, all right, what's Podling syntax like? Is it just like subject, verb, object, or is it a bit freer, like something like Old English where you can mix and match things because of agreements or whatever?
The syntax is the grammar is pretty fluid, and I did that mostly because I wanted to make sure that when the performers were learning the language, any quote-unquote mistakes they made didn't sound non-fluent, but were instead just... One of the things I told them was, like, it's okay if you make a mistake, just make that mistake consistently, right? It's a made up language, so like stressing about how accurate it is only going to get people, I think, to get stressed out. So there was a couple times when I think I got a note back that's like, oh, I said this line and I said it this way instead, and I was like, it's fine. Just next time you say that word, just use that other pronunciation, and then as long as you have consistency, it's fine. But I forgot the original question that you asked.
I was just wondering about the word order.
The word order. Yeah, the word order it matches English. So I did that to make it a little bit easier for English speakers to sort of approximate if they had to do something on the fly or improvise. So yes, it's subject, verb, object, and although I would say that there's some instances where that might not be the case, but consistently.
What's your favorite little flourish or detail that you got to slip into Podling language?
There are actually probably my favorite are some of the swear words that we included because they're mostly said in the background. Like I think they're in the Podling Wayhouse scene. You can hear them in the background, but all the Podling curse words are based on things that Podlings don't find natural. So I think there's one that I think you can hear him say it. It's like fumaye, and I think that one was like go flying, or it's stuff like that. Actually, I think that one is go take a bath. But it's stuff like that. That's like it's sort of like no, I don't want to fly. That's unnatural. Podlings belong on the ground. They don't belong in the air. So stuff like that. And some of the the background comments and things like that are always really fun to do because it's just like this background chatter that is it's funny, but also. If you don't catch it, it's not going to ruin the experience. But if you catch it and then you know what they're saying, it's just that much funnier.
So, are we going to get like a book that the vocabulary and how to speak Podling, so that we can?
I would love that. I've been getting a lot of tweets, people asking. The Dark Crystal Instagram has been doing these Learn Podling with Hup that are just hugely popular. So yeah, I would love to do something like that. We'll keep our eye open for opportunities.
Oh, good. I think that would be wonderful. I would like to have that on my shelf as well. And you mentioned the cursing thing. And that's interesting because you do a similar thing in the book that I really loved. It was like tie a knot in a rope or something along those lines. That was like a little curse that one of the Gelflings did.
Oh yeah. There was a moment where we were talking about sort of like what curse words were we going to use and what was the bar for
right.
why. And one of the things that we kind of settled on was that first of all we don't need to use curse words, and second of all let's make up some Gelfling ones. So linguistically profanity is one of the most, I want to say, like the richest places to find linguistic lore, and so doing things like knots in a rope, and there's Agra's Eye is sort of a curse that some of the characters say who are a little bit more proper. Those things are always really fun to get woven into the regular linguistic use of the characters for sure.
So is that you? How much time did you actually spend thinking about what Gelfling profanity would be?
So much time. No, I mean, sometimes it felt very natural. And sometimes I was like, no, I want an idiom that specifically has this frustration feel, and sometimes I would just leave a placeholder and then, I would be going about my daily non-Gelfling life and think, oh, this is the perfect thing, and then I got to go write it down right away before I forget. So, yeah.
And that language, it really, really flows throughout the novel. These little touches that get to the heart of the personality of the characters. Like there's a spot where Irva, I think, is talking about his bow and arrow. And he's teaching Naya, and he says its name is bow, not it's called bow, but its name is bow. Mm-hmm. And the whole novel is just filled with these wonderful little word choices, either in dialogue or thought or description, that shows like a deep personal connection the characters have to the physical world. Why was that so important for you? Like, why did you make these choices?
Yeah, so that's a great example too. For me, one of the things in building out the world of Thra was to we have A.C.H. Smith's novelization of the Dark Crystal film, which I love that novelization. I think that he brought some really amazing insight into Thra and sort of how and the Skeksis culture actually is really. I would absolutely recommend it, reading through that. It's a fantastic novel, but one of the things I loved the most about it was that he did some things that you can only do in written word, that you can't do in a visual media. And so I really wanted to uphold that tradition when I was writing the YA novels, and really think about what I mean. Words have meaning. It's actually a really important part of both writing and of the Dark Crystal. And so when Irva says its name is Bo, I mean, it's a really loaded phrase, right? Like it implies a lot. It implies a lot about how these characters view objects or how they interact with nature or creatures. And one of my favorite things about sort of how the Dark Crystal world is built is that the line between inanimate and animate and mineral and plant and animal is very blurred. It's not as distinct as we maybe pretend that it is on Earth. And so, everything has a little bit of sentience, and I think that's really really neat from a world building perspective, but also really neat from sort of a meta perspective, which is that the original film was bringing inanimate puppets to life, and the magic of that film is that it goes from you're watching puppets to you're watching real life, real living creatures, real living people in this magical real world. And so from that perspective, I really love that sort of mythology slash world stratosphere. If that makes sense. It's kind of a
It does. It does. Um, so you've written what 4 Dark Crystal novels so far? Is that correct, or is it 3?
Yes, there are 4 YA novels, and then there's a couple tie-in Age of Resistance books that are not novels, but they are books that will be coming out soon.
Okay, so yeah. So what are these new ones that are coming out?
Yeah, so we've got 2 that are coming out in November. One is called Heroes of the Resistance, and it's a character guide that kind of ties in with Age of Resistance. It's got photos of the characters and little facts and trivia and things like that. And then the second book is called Agra's Wisdom of Thra, and that is sort of more of a gift book. It's got full bleed, full color illustrations by Corey Godby, and each spread has like an Agra nugget of wisdom, and some of them are sort of philosophical and some of them are kind of funny or weird. So it's a really beautiful book, especially if you're looking for like a nice gift, or if you have just want to like get into Agra's head. It's sort of a funny way to do that. And then there's a third book that is not announced yet that I hope will be announced very soon, that I'm very excited about.
All right. And you've mentioned all these other Dark Crystal books that you've read or referenced. Were these things you read in preparation, or were some of these things also just your own enjoyment that you had stumbled upon?
So I knew that some of them had been published. I had read like Creation Myths 1, I think, before the Author Quest, but I didn't know there's like a Tokyo Pop manga that takes place during the Gartham Wars that I didn't know about. I didn't know that there were 2 more volumes of Creation Myths. I had Brian Froud's like fairies and trolls books, and some of the Lady Coddington's pressed fairy book, but I didn't have my own copy of World of the Dark Crystal. So when I was sort of like building my Dark Crystal library for Author Quest, it was a nice excuse to go all out and buy the nice collector's editions and things like that. But yeah, I read them for research, but I ended up I have to read them multiple times because I would get lost in sort of just the enjoyment of them too.
That sounds like the best research for a
Yeah.
novel ever. Um, is is that stuff, I guess, still considered canon now, or has the show changed that? Do we know?
So the mandate from Henson is that there are many works that have been produced and published between the time of the film and Age of Resistance, and that they are all canon. And one thing I know that there has been some sort of conversation about, well, this is this version and that's this version, and do they contradict each other, and what does that mean for the canon? And one of the things that I like to say is that different media has different strengths and different weaknesses, and we really try when we're working on these different projects to play to the strengths of that media and make sure that that format is getting the most out of the story that it can. So it's all canon, and I think that going into the different works sort of with an open mind as to and to think about the different like interpretations and perspectives as um, sort of I think as a creator that it is more fun and more freeing to think of things that way, because it really gives you the opportunity to take things where you think that they should go in a way that's fulfilling for that story. And I think sort of going into the world that way and viewing it as more of an open world is probably the best mindset to take when you're sort of approaching these different projects and different sort of series.
So you said that that you learned about the show in the when you were writing the second novel. When did they actually bring you on to write? Because you wrote episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
So when did this bridge happen?
So we had a call, I think, in the early phases where they were, I was actually on the phone with Will Matthews and Jeff Addis, and they were like, just so you guys can touch base and sort of discuss, because there's going to be overlap in the characters. So we had that sort of just like general conversation. But then later in the winter of 2016, I actually got an email asking if I wanted to write on the show, which was like a big, big yes, right? Because that's so cool. I mean, who would say no? It's just a once in a lifetime project. So I flew out. I was living in LA to work on the show pretty much from the beginning of the writer's room. And I was there through the story break of the overall 10 episodes, and then I wrote my episode in, I want to say, like May or something like that. So I was there for a good deal of the major story break. I knew where all of the episodes sort of were headed, which we all thought was pretty important since I was going to be writing books that lined up chronologically. So yeah, it was a good length of time and a good project, and also I think it was important as far as sort of like tying those like bridges between the books and the show.
So were you like sworn to secrecy? Like, nowadays there's these huge clauses of people can't say any spoilers. So were you subject to that same level of scrutiny here?
No, actually, because we knew that Tides of the Dark Crystal. Is this a spoiler interview? Can we talk about spoilers?
Oh yeah, absolutely, totally.
Okay. So I re-outlined the last 2 books after the show's script was written because things had changed, and I knew that the Almadra her death was going to happen in the 3rd book, and so we had this sort of question of like, is that too big of a spoiler? Because that's kind of a big moment in the series. And so the way that we did it was the book characters aren't present for it happening. They sort of hear about it through a message. So then the question of how did it happen and who did it are these rumors that are floating around. So there's still stuff to be surprised by in the show. There's a lot of stuff like that where we sort of orchestrated it strategically so that you can get the moment in the books that come out before the show, but they're not spoiling the show.
So when you're redoing these last 2 books, was there anything that was like completely off limits? Like, I mean, you said that's a pretty big spoiler. So was there anything that like, no, you can't go this far?
I don't think so. I mean, there was never really the idea of like off limits. It was more about like, how do we carefully sort of do this dance around these two different stories so that we're not bumping into each other too hard. The show sort of climaxes with one thing where the books have a sort of a different narrative climax. So that helped. Because also there was this idea, like I knew from the beginning when I was writing Shadows of the Dark Crystal that I wanted to close with the Wall of Destiny or the Wall of Prophecy. So that sort of helped give the books their own narrative angle. But no, there was never anything that they were like, no, don't do that and don't go there. So there were, I mean, there are occasionally some places where you'll see, I think, if you read the books closely and then you watch the show, that you'll see that there was like that, there's very parallel like universe moments happening. But there was never anything that was strictly off limits, I suppose.
Was there anything that you had to take out or change in books 3 or 4 that you really wanted to keep in, but just the structure of the story had changed?
Yes, there was. But I can't actually talk about it too much because in the case that we do get a season 2, it's possible that those things can still happen. So one of the things that we were able to do is, if something did get cut for time or it did get cut for story conflict, we try to leave things open so that, in the case that we do get a season 2, maybe we can go there, maybe we can finish that story or, do those things. So yeah, that's always the hope.
Had you ever written like in script form? Because that is we were talking about different mediums have different strengths. A script is different from regular prose. Had you dabbled in that style before?
I mean, I had taken, screenwriting in college. That was an interest of mine, but most of my experience was in film analysis. So yeah, there was a moment where, I'm an author of novels in the writer's room, and I think Jeff turned to me and he was like, "So, have you?" I'm just asking, like, have you ever read a script before? I was like, yeah, don't worry. I know what a script looks like. But it was a challenge. I mean, changing mindsets and thinking about how those things sort of are supposed to play out. But I mean, luckily, everybody in the writer's room was, Will and Jeff are amazing mentors. Javi's an amazing mentor. And everybody was willing to sort of like bear with me while I was doing my first screenplay. But yeah, I mean, luckily story breaking and thinking about story is very similar between book series and television when you're doing so. Wasn't too far behind the curve on that.
You ended up writing one of my absolute favorite scenes in the series, the Peeper Beetles.
Yes.
my oldest son, who's 10, he straight up left the room. He doesn't like bugs to begin with, but I mean, it was just too much for him. When were there times where you like, can we do this on a kid's show? I mean, this show gets dark at times. So how did you guys approach that?
So there was never a moment where during the story break, I would say, like during ideation, that people were like, no, that's too dark. We pushed it, we were trying to really feel that out. And then of course later on, I mean, there were some maybe moments where people were like, no, that's, we're going to cut, Louis Leterrier probably, not probably, but certainly made decisions where, we don't film that. We don't actually film it, at the end of episode 2, it's more of a sound effect, things like that. But during sort of the writing process, I felt like we really wanted to push those boundaries. That scene is so funny to me because when we were trying to figure out what the event was going to be, like what the mechanism was going to be, we were just shouting out, all of these like terrible ideas, like it's a beetle, it's some sort of terrible machine, like I don't know, it was very similar to the way the Skeksis are shouting out all of their ideas. Like what terrible things can we do to the scientist in this scene? Yeah.
Was there any suggestion that was just like too much, too dark, or?
I don't think so. I mean, when I was especially when I was envisioning it the first time, I always thought of the boo box scene from Hook.
Huck, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like I would say, like when I was the mood of that scene, I wanted to be like the boo box scene from Hook, which is this terrible, you know. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it.
Oh, I have. No, I
Yeah,
absolutely have Huck.
you'll
Yeah.
probably see the connections. But also another scene that I've always loved that had the sort of flavor that I was kept trying to go back to is the scene in The Witches where the main character is hiding while the witches are taking off their wigs and off their shoes and things and their masks, and it's just like this very scary, very like I'm going to be found out, and this is also terrible and scene. Also, just a fantastic cinematic moment, but yeah, I don't think there was any moments where we're like, no, that's too far.
Which I have to say that that kind of surprises me given the level of darkness, because I think you went a way darker than the boo box.
Yeah,
it,
maybe.
it's more akin to like a Werner Herzog film. Like it's dark, but I love, and I think my son actually we had a good talk about this later of the value of having dark and scary and negative things in kids stories. So was that? I mean, that was always one thing I appreciated about Jim Henson, was he never talked down to the audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like there have been interviews with him that where has said, I'm gonna paraphrase, but basically that, you know, it's in a way it's healthy for kids to be able to experience scary things in television. It's, you know, you're gonna experience scary stuff in your real life when it actually might be, you know, dangerous in a way. But in at least through media, you can start to sort of feel out what those feelings are and become familiar with them. And that in a lot of ways, I think is it's healthy for young viewers, young readers to be exposed to those types of concepts and things. You know, and to me as an adult, some of the scariest concepts in Age of Resistance and in the YA novels is not sort of like the more gory or gruesome stuff. It's like the political stuff, you know? It's like, oh, this is a metaphor for something that's happening right now. Weird, you know, and it's sort of that's scary too, in a completely different way. So yeah, I think that we were definitely trying, or at least I was, you know, in my aspect of the work to feel out both my own feelings about some of these things and also sort of introduce ideas about how to react to those things, right? And in the books, Naya she's a healer, right? She has healing magic, and there's a question sort of throughout the course of the 4 books when we find out that the Skeksis are doing these terrible things. Do we turn to violence against them, or do we try to heal the planet that we are part of, right? And sort of introducing those concepts and ideas and solutions and hope and those types of things as equally as important as sort of laying out the less good and the terrible things that are happening at the same time.
Did you guys talk in the writer's room about the fact that there was topical aspects to the story, or did that just kind of evolve naturally?
I'd say it evolved naturally. It wasn't we weren't surprised by it. I mean, we're all on the same page. It was May of 2017, so and it shows. But I think that there were some moments where we got very emotional in the writers' room too. There were some moments where, you know, things happened in the world and in our personal lives that touched the show, and I think that shows too. I think that you can feel that we all had a personal connection, both to the characters and sort of the wonder of the Dark Crystal, but also in an attempt to say, like, you know, how we're feeling about what's happening right now.
Do you have to balance as an author we are in, we'll say, very polarizing times. Do you have to balance your feelings about something versus the need to tell a story that is accessible to everybody?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. Um, I would say yes, but maybe in the best way. I think for me, the challenge is in um, sort of translating things so that they are accessible. So, like, if I have a book that I'm working on that is about colonialism, right? Like, it's about the Pony Express. It's about the westward migration specifically in the mid 19th century. And so that was a topical aspect then, but we also look at that differently now. And in writing that story, how do you write the story such that somebody who doesn't know what you're talking about can understand the story and also is going to absorb or also learn something about that topic, even if they didn't know anything about it before they started reading that story or watching that series. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Has Star Wars has become synonymous with toxic fandom and pushback against social issues, and yet the Dark Crystal really latched onto some of this, and there is, like we said, we've talked about some topical aspects. There's even a gay couple, and has there been any pushback? I haven't seen any, but like, has it received that any of that level of vitriol?
I don't know actually. Like, I try to actually give sort of the fan conversation its own space because I want that conversation to happen like naturally in a way that I'm not trying to influence or, whatever, like metal.
Right.
I want people to be able to have those conversations in their own space where they don't feel like they have to change what they're thinking or saying just because somebody else is watching. So I don't know, but I know that, for example, Deet having two dads was something that was very, very important in the books. Tavra and Annika are explicitly in a canonical romantic relationship. And things like that were very important for us as writers to include. And I think that populating the Dark Crystal world, because like in the original film, right, there's only two characters, basically. There's two Gelfling. We don't really know what that world looked like. And so the opportunity to populate the Gelfling world in a way that is diverse and shows representation, both in so many different ways, was something that was very important to all of us to sort of, make it contemporary in a lot of ways. But as far as pushback, I mean, like within the writers' room, no, absolutely not. Everybody was very, encouraging and supportive. And as far as the fans go, I haven't personally received any of that. But I suppose I can't speak to what's going on, in
Right.
places that I'm not looking.
And I think Age of Resistance is a kind of a textbook model of why to include diversity, because it made the Gelflings so much more compelling. Instead of just being characters who were kind of like a Tolkien-ish elves who were just all beautiful and all wonderful, there is a full diversity of characters. There's flaws and just a real sense of what life is like. So I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, and that was something that was really important to me too when building out the books. I looked at the film and I looked at Jen and Kira, who I love, and I thought to myself, like, what aren't we seeing here? Which is a lot, right? We only have two characters, so we're not representing like anybody else. And so, that was something that was important to me to show, like brown characters and green characters and blue characters, And one of my favorite things about the way that Brian Froud sort of started working through the designs for these other characters and things, and in original film as well, is that they're not symmetrical. They're not all I'm making air quotes, like perfect. And I think that that is something that is so important, especially when you're doing we see CG'd characters who have these very, very symmetrical, faces with, they look like they look that way, right? And
Yeah.
then to see these puppets who look so much more tactile and touchable because they're physical objects with their asymmetrical faces. And Agra has her, her one eye and her mustache and all of that, and her wrinkles. And those things are so important and so, to me, like what makes the Dark Crystal so different and wonderful, or those details and that vast diversity.
So, was there any way that you mimicked that asymmetrical approach, but in writing?
Hmm. I don't think I did. I didn't do it intentionally in any way, because Corey Gabi did the illustrations for the books, and when I write, I visualize, but I'm not as visual as I think in, like as like building a puppet or 2D and things. But I did try to have sort of that texture in many ways. But yeah, no, that's definitely a strength that I think is much more in the wheelhouse of the TV series, and getting to see those puppets crafted, and those, in the documentary you can see the hairs like individually hand punched on the
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
biscuit, things like that. It's just so wonderful.
So we've talked a little bit about this. Was there anything in the writers' room that you really wanted to see on screen, but didn't make it, that you can talk about?
Hmm. I mean, there's always like places that I would love to see. Like I would love to see. There's a like a what am I trying to say? It's so hard to describe because it's all fantasy things. There's you know what I mean? But there's these great trees that each of the Gelfling clans, sort of their clans focus in the geographically focus around these great trees.
Yeah.
And the Drenchen tree is this tree that all of the Drenchen Gelfling live inside. And so like seeing something like that would have been really cool to see on screen. But at the same time, they didn't go to that location, and it would have been very expensive. So.
Yeah, because one of those trees is in the first book. It's where Urva is stuck. Is that correct? Yes.
That is one of the trees. One of the trees is in the show, and it is beautiful. The pink petal tree.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So that tree features in Song of the Dark Crystal. So yeah, because I could have just imagined that if the sanctuary tree was so beautiful, like how amazing would the Drenchen tree be? But maybe later.
So is that's something you would like to explore in future, if there's a season 2? Would maybe see some more of these trees?
I would love to see that, yeah. And I think that, I mean, it's also just like sort of, it's the small things too. It's like, in locations, I suppose, for me as a person who, I mean, like when I visited the set, I was just blown away by being able to step foot in these places. I love the puppets. I love them. And I think seeing them interact with their surroundings is so cool. There's another location in Song of the Dark Crystal called the Tomb of Relics, which sort of came and went out of the scripts, which would have been a really cool set. But also, again, like, we have limited real estate in the 10 episodes. But yeah, I would love to see exploration of like these locations, and of course see more Gelfling and see more characters, and see how they all sort of come to life.
Yeah, there was a picture in the documentary of like a Gelfling tall ship, like a boat. That, like, I was like, oh man, that would, like, Gelfling pirate kind of stuff would be so awesome. But I don't even know how to begin thinking about the logistics of puppets and water. Like, that's
that's actually another one too. So one of the things that happened with book 3 is, we knew then, when I was outlining it, we knew where the show was going to go, and they said, why don't you go do water? Like, go do boats and water in book 3, because we can't do that in season 1.
All right, so I've got something to look forward to, is what you're telling me.
Yep. So tied to the Dark Crystal, they meet Annika, and she has a boat. They sail around. We see the Sifa. They have a big coral ship, and Skeksaw the Mariner is sort of the main antagonist, Skeksis, and she has a different kind of sea creature that she has sort of enslaved into being her seafaring vessel. So there's a lot of swashbuckling, and we went some places in book 3 too. Like there's a sandstorm in the Crystal Desert, and they're flying around on the crystal skimmers, and it's very action packed.
That really excites. Now I'm gonna have to go back to the bookstore to get books 2 and 3 to keep going, which I was gonna do anyway, but now I'm just like
Right.
moved along a little more. Did you know that your characters like Naya were to make it into the show, or was that like your own kind of like, hey guys, why don't we have this character?
I mean, I think there was always the idea that they would be in the show, but we also, I think, we weren't sure to what capacity, just because we weren't sure like how will the story unfold, how like how is this, how will it not be too weird, but yeah. Being able to see Naya and Kylan and Tavra interact and exist and run around is like it's pretty cool. It's unlike any other joy, I think. I mean, like I can imagine that there would be a certain feeling if your book is adapted for film with human actors, but there's something like even cooler to see them as puppets.
So you mentioned there's a Skeksis that is a seafaring one, and there's one that's in the original movie that's not in the series. Skek Ung. He's the guy who becomes the emperor in the movie.
Yes.
Was there a specific reason that you can talk about that he was left out of the show? Was this a discussion in the room?
I don't actually remember, so I can't answer the question because I don't know.
Okay, so are we to assume then that there are at least other Skeksis out there that...
Yes, there are a finite number of Skeksis, but not all of them live in the castle all the time. So there's a conversation at one point where they're like, the Skeksis, I think it's the Emperor, is talking about, okay, we gotta go fight the Gelfling. Who should we call to help us fight? And they list off a couple names there. There are 2 Skeksis in the books that do not appear in the show. And then, of course, there are some Skeks. There's at least one Skeksis that appears in the show that does not appear in the book series, who's a very delightful surprise for anybody who doesn't know that he's coming.
Yes. Is this the one that's mentioned in the books?
He might. I don't think he's mentioned, actually. I think he was one of the characters. So basically, there's a set number of Skeksis, and there's 18 Skeksis, and in the film there are fewer than 18 Skeksis, which we could believe means either in the time passing between the prequel world and the film world they have become no more in some way, or maybe they're just not there for the Great Conjunction, which I don't know. I feel like that would be an event that if I was a Skeksis, I might want to get there. But yeah, so there's always this sort of question mark, and there's a lot of narrative space to occupy. Who were those Skeksis that aren't in the film, and what are they doing in the prequel world, and when will they appear?
So this question is like, I kind of feel like I'm asking like a special forces operative about a top secret mission, but because I think I know the answer I'm going to get here. But the end of the show works relatively as a standalone piece, but there are clearly places to go. There are certain threads that are intentionally left unfinished. Has there been talk about a sequel?
I mean, everybody wants a sequel. Everybody. We always. So I can't. I mean, like that's, I think, not even a question. I personally do not have any information about whether or if anything about a season 2. What I can say is that if you want a season 2, talk about the show, watch the show over and over and over again, and show everybody that we want a season 2. And that's what you can do.
and that's we have been writing. I think we've written at least 3 or 4 articles on the Dark Crystal series, and then we've got this and a couple others coming. So I will be doing everything I can to push this agenda along.
Fantastic.
You've been living with the Dark Crystal as an author for like 6 years. It seems. Creatively, that's a long time. Are you wanting to move on to something else, or are you ready to do another 6 years in this world?
I mean, if there was a season 2, I would want to be a part of it. Whether, I mean, like, it has been a long time, but also it's a good time. You know what I mean? And the world is so big that there, like you said, you know, at the end of the series, and also you'll see it in the books too, that there are so many places to go, and we're building the world in that way so that there are places to go, and I want to go to those places, you know. So, yeah, I love it.
You briefly did talk about you do have another book coming out, Nightland Express.
Yes.
That seems like a very big departure from the Dark Crystal.
In a way, it is. I would say that, you know, anybody who has read the Dark Crystal books and you know, is looking for a character-driven story that is telling a story about how people or Gelfling connect to the planet. Those themes are all integral in, I want to say, the majority of my work. The Nightland Express is a little bit different because it does take place, you know, in Earth in 1861, but it still has a lot of the same themes, and I think, I mean, like, it also has a magical element to it as well. So, I mean, some of the, I would sort of describe it as the Nightland, or the Pony Express, but with fairies. So there is still that sort of magical element, that magical layer on top that I think will appeal to people who like that about the Dark Crystal.
What attracted you to colonial times? It's an interesting place to put fairies.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, for me, the idea came in sort of learning more about the Pony Express historically, and sort of the geographic and political sort of place that it took during westward migration was very fascinating to me. It was also fascinating to me that for a book that, or not a book, but like a period of time and an event that really focused around young people doing this very dangerous thing, riding across the country on horseback, that there wasn't anything in YA about that. So that sort of was what drew me to it. But then learning and sort of listening to the impact of that really and maybe some of it was Dark Crystal influence really too, but thinking about what is the human impact on both the planet itself, but also what was the impact on westward migration in separating people from the planet and from the land in the context of history, and then using sort of a metaphor of magical capitalism, I guess, to drive that story it's a lot, but yeah, I don't know. It's been a passion project of mine for many years now. So it's really fascinating to see it all sort of kind of finally come together.
Why YA? We just talked to another author, Lexi Reese, who does similar age group, and I asked her the same question. I was curious, what drives you to write young A novels?
I mean, it's a lot of different things, and I want to say foremost, it's because I try to write for who I was when I was devouring books at a speed that I have never re-achieved, which was, you know, in high school, and for me it was like late middle school and high school and early college, and so in some ways I'm trying to write the book that I wish I had been able to read during that time, which just puts it in that age category. But also, I mean, I feel that as a writer, if I am trying to tell a story that makes an impact and that says something and that empowers people, I think about like who are the people that I want to reach with that work. And to me, I think that young people who are learning and forming their own, ideas about the world, those are the people that I want to reach and speak to. So for me, it's more about, I guess, that. Um, and then in another way too, like the coming of age story is just I think it's accessible to a lot of people. We were all young adults, like I mean most of us. And I think that writing a coming of age story can appeal to people who are coming of age themselves, but it can also appeal to people who uh, have already moved past maybe that phase in their life, but they can still relate to it. So there's something just so human about it that I think it does speak to a wide variety of people beyond just like the YA age category.
What books did you devour? What were some of your favorites?
Oh my gosh, so many. I mean, I really love science fiction fantasy. Some of my favorites. I mentioned Tad Williams' Tail Chasers song. It's this book about these talking cats. That was like a favorite of mine when I was a kid. I was really into Game of Thrones actually when the books before the show, like long, like a decade before the show was announced. I remember just spending nights like up until like just reading through the entire night, reading through those books. But yeah, a lot of sort of the sort of long running like Wheel of Time and things like that. Those sort of books. Yeah. Roger Zelazny. Have you read Nine Princes in Amber by Roger Zelazny? I think that I heard that there was like some sort of optioning going on for that. That would be amazing. The next Game of Thrones, maybe. But yeah, that was a huge favorite of mine.
When is Nightland Express going to hit the shelves? Do we know?
So Nightland Express is planned for autumn of 2020 from Erewhon Books. We don't have a concrete date yet, but it should be a fall release.
Right. So you have 4 books coming out in the next year or so. Yeah. It seems like an odd question, but where? Do you have any idea where you're going after that, or?
I'm currently working on another YA project. It's a little bit more commercial and less sort of like esoteric, I suppose. That I hope every time I finish a book, I'm like, well, that's the one, and I guess don't have any ideas anymore. And then you kind of sit around for a little while, and then this little idea starts to grow bigger and bigger, and that current project is just about ready to get its first draft. So I'm looking forward to that.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're finding interesting in this new project?
So this new one, I really wanted to. One of the things I did actually in the Dark Crystal books that was really fun for me is to take fantasy into a cold place. So Harar is very wintry and snowy, and so I've been very drawn to the idea of writing a story that takes place in sort of a cold environment and looking at how the world would sort of be different if that were the case all the time. I suppose there's notes of climate change, but I guess it's like a bit of a theme, I guess, throughout my work. But yeah, so in this book, it's a little bit about the question is what if astrology was the deciding basis for how people ran their government? So that's, I guess, sort of the idea.
All right. I will be very interested to see this when it comes out. Our last question. Our last question. The main edict of our website is to do what you're passionate about, what you're geeky about. So other than writing and fantasy, what is something that you are very geeky about?
I'm super geeky about old RPGs, and I cannot wait for the Final Fantasy VII remake to come out. I'll just say that. Like, wow.
What is your favorite RPG? Or a couple?
I mean, like, I love the Final Fantasy series. Has been an amazing thing to replay as an adult and look at it from like a totally different perspective. But also, like, we just spent. I mean, I've logged over 400 hours on Breath of the Wild, so
Right? Oh my
yeah,
god.
it's a problem, or is it?
Zelda is very big in my house. It's my personal favorite
Yeah.
franchise game wise, but
One of my favorite things about watching how video games have changed is how, I feel like back in, the 90s, it was just very point oriented, and now games are narrative oriented. And I just love how in Breath of the Wild, in trying to reward players to explore, sometimes the best reward is the view. And I think that really making that a satisfying experience has just changed how gaming works, and I love it.
fantastic. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us today.
Yeah,
Uh,
thank you for having me.
I look forward to the next 4 books that are coming out next year. Um, have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
That was author J.M. Lee. You can pick up his books pretty much anywhere books are sold. The Dark Crystal series he wrote starts with Shadows of the Dark Crystal, then Song of the Dark Crystal, Tides of the Dark Crystal, and Flames of the Dark Crystal. He has 2 new ones coming out, Augra's Wisdom of Thra and the Dark Crystal Heroes of the Resistance. Keep an eye out for those. You have been listening to the World Geekly News podcast. Please check us out at www.worldgeeklynews.com. Don't forget to check out our other wonderful podcasts, the Man About a Dog podcast presented by the Ultimate Movie Geek, and our Games Up video game podcast, all brought to you by World Geekly News.